Hello there. By golly, time goes very quickly. It must mean we're having a lot of fun because there is that saying that time flies when you're having fun. Nice to be back with you for another edition of the Coaching Hour, and a very warm welcome to you from myself, Paul Rotherham. I'm joined, of course, as always, by our two lovely ladies who form the Coaching Network team, Coaches Network South Africa team, and who are my friends and colleagues in our Coaching Hour project, Coaching Hour podcast project. I shouldn't drink before I do these things. Marika, Mary, how's it?
We're good, thank you, Paul.
Wonderful. Lovely to have you with us. And I'm thrilled because for the first time in I don't know how long, we are joined by a man as a guest. I mean, it doesn't really matter, but it is quite nice to have two gents and two ladies in the room, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. So today we're going to have Mike Handcock, and it's our special guest. So he is a 7-time international bestseller and the next president of the Global Speakers Federation. And he's also the chairman of the Circle of Excellence group of companies that assist conscious leaders to play a bigger game. So thank you so much, Mike, for joining us today for this podcast. But before we get into our topic for today, maybe just tell our listeners and whoever's watching, who's Mike and how did you get into this industry?
Hi, Marika. Hi, everybody else, and hi to all our listeners. I was born in Australia, lived most of my life in New Zealand, apart from living in the US when I was playing in a band in my younger years and played in a touring band. So I had a lot of fun doing that. And I've been living in South Africa for around 10 years now. My wife's South African, so we live in Strand in Cape Town. So how did I get into this? I was a very much a type A personality corporate who had got pretty much to the top of my game. I was general manager, sales and marketing for New Zealand's biggest financial services institution. I ran about 4,500 brokers, a budget in Rand of about 2.5 billion a year. And I realized every week when I flew to Wellington for our board meeting, sitting around the table, these people really don't care about the company. They actually don't really want to do anything. Most of the time, they're just trying to get their bonus and stay out of trouble. And I started thinking, this whole system's broken. And I saw a lot of people that I worked with who had so much potential, but were never able to really tap into that potential. And I said to myself, I want to be a person who helps people unleash their potential. And so I manufactured my way out of corporate over about an 18-month period. That was just over 20 years ago now, maybe 21 years ago. And for the last 20 odd years, I've been working with conscious leaders and entrepreneurs all over the planet. We've got clients in more than 50 countries these days. And, we're regular travelers. I'm off to Indonesia at the end of this month, and then Singapore and perhaps Europe on the way back to meet with clients and do things. So I think, I'm one of these people who's been able to manufacture my own life. And I encourage a lot of other people to do it as well.
It's an incredible position to be in. Hey? We speak to so many people who have this experience where something happens one day, they literally wake up and almost overnight there's a change and they just decide, that's it, I'm done. Something has changed in me or something has changed in my environment and I'm out of here. It's not always a success story though, is it?
No, well, I think, there's common sense prevails as well. You said, I noticed I said, I manufactured my way out of corporate over 18 months. And Landi, my wife, did the same thing. She was HR director for one of the biggest logistics companies on the planet, and she wanted to do her own thing as well. So she started job hopping. And, when you job hop, to increase your salary, most people spend it, but she saved it. And she was able to save 8 months worth of income in order for her to go into her own business. I was actually able to manufacture my own redundancy. And from that, I got enough money to launch my own business. So sometimes you've got to just jump in the water and try and swim. But for most of the time, you probably want to see if there's some sharks out there before you jump in the water.
Very true. So today we're going to talk about conscious leadership. And you also wrote a book on conscious leadership. And I must say it's like off late, the word consciousness is becoming a bit of a buzzword. I even saw that there's a book written on the conscious lawyer, which is also very interesting, to me. But my question is, how did you start with that term in terms of conscious leadership? Because I do also a lot of workshops and training with corporates, and it's I still find the transition into that conscious mindset quite challenging.
Sure. I think, Marika, it came around about 15 or 16 years ago now. And I realized that entrepreneurship as we knew it was dead. Okay. That there was a new breed of entrepreneur, and that was the social entrepreneur. People who were doing things because they made a difference. And I started to understand that, the way the future was going, if you had an opportunity to buy off company A and they were totally a for-profit company, or company B who had the same product, but they gave something back to society, you were going to buy from company B. And then I realized that there was another thing happening, and that was people were becoming more spiritual. In fact, I remember Lundy and I sat in the foyer, in a cafe in the foyer of Price Waterhouse in Auckland, New Zealand. And the two actuaries next to us were talking about their past lives. And I went, boy, things have changed since I've been in corporate. And that's probably 10 years ago now. So I started realizing that overall what it meant was that people were becoming more conscious. And then I read a fantastic article in Forbes magazine about conscious leadership back in 2016. And this is what it said. It said, conscious leaders aren't trying to save the planet. The conscious leader is a person who is prepared to do the deep inner work inside themselves so that they can turn up as the best and most authentic version of themselves. And I went, that makes perfect sense to me. So in 2017, we launched the Conscious Leadership Movement. We grew it to several thousand members where it sits today as well, which is a global movement of people really interested in engaging conscious leadership type of ideas. In 2020, I brought the book out. But like yourself, I think some corporates are struggling with the idea of consciousness because they think it's spiritual. But spiritual, they don't even understand what spiritual is. Spiritual actually means, the word spirit means to breathe. So if we're all spiritual, aren't we, in some degree or not? Spiritual is not woo-woo. Spiritual is having faith and belief in something bigger than yourself. And isn't that what everybody in corporate wants? To have faith and belief in the company, which is bigger than the individual. So it's exactly the same thing. Once you start sort of explaining that to people, they sort of go, oh, yeah, I get that. Okay, well, let's not do any woo-woo stuff, but I'm happy with what you're talking about, right? Yeah. And of course, once you get into it, they all want the woo-woo stuff anyway. It's fascinating to me with corporates. You can run strategic sessions with high-end C-suite leaders, and all they want to do is work out whether they were a frog in a past life or whether they've been married to the same person 4 times or something like that. So the world is a very changing place, and that's part of its beauty.
Yes. Wow, that's fascinating. And I also actually started noticing that, but you kind of have to start off a bit strategic, etc. But I find that they are more open to the idea. But I think that internal transition into becoming a conscious leader for the individual becomes a personal choice, right? I don't know if they...
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But I don't think corporates have a choice anymore. I think they have to become conscious. So let me tell you what that is, because it goes on a little bit further than what I said before. So firstly, if you're a leader and you're in a corporation, guess what? You have to do the deep inner work inside yourself to understand who you are so that you can turn up as the best and most authentic version of yourself. If you're not authentic in 2024, 2025, 2026, you ain't going to be chosen. But you are not going to be promoted, right? That's just it. You're going to be forgotten. Secondly, as a conscious leader, there are really 4 or 5 things that we have to do. One is that instead of just having a vision now, we have to have a purposeful vision. It has to have purpose behind it. And that purpose is not just to make money. It has to have something different. We have to have values-based leadership. And, you know, I've been in companies, Mareki, and I won't mention the company, but it's one of the biggest banks in the world with the CEO. And they told me how good their work they've done on values. And I asked him to dial the COO and pass the phone to me. And I asked the COO, "Hi, it's Mike Handcock here. I'm in the office with your CEO, such and such. We were just having a chat. Can you tell me what the company values are?" This is what he said. "Oh, yeah, hang on. I've got them here somewhere." "Oh, no, don't worry." I said, I'll get back to you. I looked at the CEO and said, "Really?" So values-based leadership is number two. A collaborative mindset, whereas most of us have been bred into having a competitive mindset. So it's shifting to a collaborative mindset. Number four is to make a difference, literally go mad to make a difference every day. And number five is legacy. So the greatest CEOs and the greatest leaders realize that they leave a footprint by their leadership, and that footprint needs to be a very positive legacy. So if we can incorporate those five things that I just mentioned, you know, values-based leadership, collaborative mindset, purposeful vision, legacy, and making a difference, then, and we're prepared to do the deep inner work inside ourselves, then I think we've set ourselves up to have great careers, to make a difference, and to feel purposeful and fulfilled every day.
Touching on something there, Mike, I think you've hit the nail on the head in that transitioning something from a corporate boardroom into the minds of not only the leaders, but the people who are the company, because people forget that. We often refer to these massive, powerful companies or a big church or whatever the organization may be. And people forget that that is simply a group of people, ideally all with a common goal, all moving in the same direction. I grew up, I spent some of my early years in my career working for one of the biggest media companies in South Africa. And I'll never forget this. We had what we called the formula on the walls. Now, the formula is probably something you've come across in your travels. I stand to be corrected, but I seem to recall it originated in either Australia or New Zealand, incidentally. And what it was a graphically depicted mathematical formula that ultimately was made out to be what would allow the company to be successful. So I don't know if I'm explaining that clearly, but it would be a whole load of things. So arrogance, for instance, I'll never forget, was one of the issues or one of the formula where arrogance had to be divided by a certain number, because the key was not to be arrogant. And they had all of these wonderful icons and it was depicted beautifully. But the question is, how did that translate into everybody's everyday behavior? And I think that, to me, that's the key here, is to get it off the wall and into practice. So how do you do that?
Well, I think it's common sense, and common sense isn't that common. And I love what you said there, Paul. So about the formula, some consultant got rich over that one, but that's for sure. But for instance, where have manners gone these days? So is it okay to be late? What about the Zoom meetings in corporate where you can't be bothered turning a camera on? Like, I'm a professional speaker. I mean, I've done over 3,000 talks. If I do a virtual talk and people don't have their camera on, I just tell them I'm just waiting for Paul to turn his camera on, and then we'll move on. You know, I want to see my audience. I want you to have manners. So manners would be the first thing in corporate. And I think if we can install as leaders that we expect manners and we expect empathy. Now, it's not easy to have empathy, but empathy is different than sympathy. Empathy is putting yourself in the other person's shoes. I think that will help. And then I think the other one, which is the accountability side, is just to install simple questions. And, you know, if somebody would come to me in corporate, I learned this one in corporate, and they'd say, "Boss, we've got a problem." I'd say, "Imagine I wasn't here today. What are you going to do about that problem?" And then they'd say, "Well, I'm going to do this." And I'd say, "Okay, well, that could be one option," because obviously it's not good, right? I'd say, "What would be another option?" And they say, "Well, I could do that." So, okay, well, maybe if you fine tune the second option by this, that could be exactly what I'd do. And they say, "Oh, that's great." And I say, "See, you've answered it." I do that 3 or 4 times and they stop coming into my office with problems. So, you know, it's simple things to get people to be more conscious, to help them understand that they've got to be polite to other people to get anywhere. They've got to be timely. They've got to think for themselves, and they've got to have accountability. And I'm not sure that we need to ask for much more than that to really, but those things have disappeared. They've disappeared in corporate. I mean, Lundy and I were speaking at a conference a couple of years ago with a company in this country who employs around 90,000 people. So they're a big company, and they've won multiple international awards for their work with staff. And we sat in their conference for a day, and at the end of the day, I went up to the CEO and I said, "Can I have a word with you?" And he said, "Sure." And, he thanked us for coming and talking and everything. I said, "I think you've got a big problem." He said, "What's that?" I said, "You've got all these awards." And I said, "We did a background on you for humanity and what you're doing with staff." I didn't hear people mentioned once today in this conference. It was all about shareholder value, return on investment, return from different business units, et cetera, et cetera. I said, "You're heading down the slide." And he went, "Well, I don't think that's true." I said, "Well, take it or leave it," right? So I think that's the problem that we've got in corporate these days, is we're so focused on the spreadsheet that we've forgotten the people side. But the spreadsheet doesn't exist. The company doesn't exist. Only people exist.
Do you think we're living in a time, and I'm not just referring to the youngsters of today, of which I have two, one who's 21 and my daughter is 18. Do you think we're living in an age, Mike, where people are generally, and it is a generalization, lazy?
That's a great question, Paul. I think the answer is no, but let me clarify my no. My no is that they're not lazy when it comes to doing something that they want to do. So what we've done, and probably not your generation, but probably my generation, because I'm a little older than you, was brought up by so many dictatorians that we went, we're not doing that for our kids. They can do whatever they want, and they can be, we'll just support them, and, there'll be a lot of love and everything like that, that our kids have run off the rails. And I think that's what we're seeing globally at the moment, which is appearing somewhat as laziness, but they're not lazy if they want to game all day. They're not lazy if they want to, sit on their phones all day. They're quite happy to do that. So I wouldn't say people are lazy. I would say people are distracted.
How do we fix that?
That's such a good point, Mark. I like that explanation. People are
Thanks, Mary.
Yes,
And
Paul.
you
Paul, you asked, how do we change that? I think we need strong leaders, and we need people who are bold and people who are prepared to stand up. Most of us in business are call centers. We get up in the morning, we check our emails, we respond to people, we become responsive. We wait for the phone to ring, we respond to what's going on the phone. Whereas for me, a bold, conscious leader gets up in the morning, puts all of that aside, focuses on what's important to them, i.e., maybe their meditation, their prayer, their fitness, a combination of both, their diet, their journal, their planning, their bigger picture, their dreams, their this and that and the other. And once that has had attention to paid to it, then they start to go to their work. And so, for instance, I'll give you an example, and I don't want to sidetrack the discussion too much, but Lundy, my wife, hasn't used email for over 10 years. And we've got clients in more than 50 countries. And numbers of them are corporates. She had Thomson Reuters change the way they did business worldwide to fit in with what she was doing, because she didn't have an email address anymore. So, I mean, don't tell me people aren't prepared to change if they wanted to do business with you. We set the rules. It's our rules. You don't have to respond. I don't have notifications sent to my phone. I don't take phone calls. My phone hasn't rung in, I don't know, weeks. If I do get a phone call, it's probably from somebody I've pre-prepared to actually have a phone call with me, but that's almost a non-event. We've got to take control of our lives. We're too much allowing our lives to be controlled. We're call centers.
That is probably one of the best analogies I have heard in literally years. And I would love to hear more about what your wife has done in terms of migrating away from emails. The most obvious question that follows that statement is, how is she communicating?
She communicates these days by WhatsApp primarily. So, most of what she does in business is on WhatsApp. And I have to say that since she's done that, like I'm still on email, I can't profess not to be, but it would be a rare day that I would spend more than about half an hour on email. So I'm really not a lot on email, and anything that's not from a client, basically gets deleted. So, so I think it's about taking control. Neither of us take phone calls, so we don't do phones. My phone is a camera, right? So that's what it is. It's there for holidays, and it's there for me to play on Facebook and things like that. Rescue Time, that's a great app. If any of you are stuck and going, where's my time going today? Just put Rescue Time on your computer. It'll tell you what you're doing. Back in 2015, we were in 40 countries that year. And I did my math and I worked out we were spending 6.5 weeks inside an airplane that year. So that's a lot, right? And if you don't believe me, do the math of flying around the world 4.5 times. You'll soon realize how long you spend actually inside the plane. But we had to do things differently. So that's when I put Rescue Time on my computer. There's many other options just like it, but it tells me where I'm spending my time. And I couldn't believe it. 46% of my time online back in 2015 was in design. I run 5 companies. What am I doing being a designer? So we immediately hired a full-time designer. Wow. We just went and hired them. And at that stage, I was spending nearly 4 hours a day online. So that's 2 hours a day of my time essentially was spent in design. So I got literally a day of my week back. Hence, I don't work Fridays these days, right? So it's very rare I work a Friday. So, it's about studying where you're putting your values in and where you're putting your time in. And it's about educating your clients. So for us, our clients are educated when they come on board. We do not respond to you on Fridays. We're not at work. Send us an email on Fridays. Mike will respond to you on Monday morning. Okay, that's it. Lundy doesn't have email. You can't email her. If you want her, WhatsApp her. Neither of us take phone calls. Why? Because we've got clients in 50 countries. Today we're in South Africa. Tomorrow we're in Indonesia. It could be the middle of the night. So we just had to educate people. And when you do that, do you lose a few people? Yes. But you want to.
Is it worth it? Yes.
Yes. Right? Yeah. You've got to polarize. When I said people are pleasers before, we need to polarize. So as I'm talking now, some of the listeners will be going, gee, Mike's really great. This is really good information. I like it. Other people will be going, what a dork, right? It doesn't matter. What matters is the people who like you. You just want more of them. And that's what you've got to hunt. And the people who don't, why are you chasing the people who are not going to fall into your value systems? Why are you doing that? So you've got to have a values match with people. And when you have a values match, business is easy. I mean, we haven't had a customer complaint or even the remotest bit like it in more than 10 years.
That's because nobody ever answers their emails, Mike.
No, I answer the emails, and Chris, who works for us, answers his email. That's what he's paid to do. But I wish it was so. But it's just because you set it up that way. But if you try and please everybody, I was talking to a lady yesterday. She runs a great company based in Cape Town. She's been in business 26 years. She said her biggest client is the most abusive person in the world. I said, fire him today. She said, what am I going to do about my biggest client, replacing him? I said, take a holiday, relax, and realize that you never have to take that crap again.
Yeah. And we do, don't we, as humans who I think now more than ever are chasing money. And I say that because that's largely been how my life has become, I would say, probably well before COVID, even if I'm honest. We do, to use your phrase, and I apologize, we take a lot of crap. Why? It's a rhetorical question, of course, because I think the answer is different for all of us, but it does come down ultimately to money in some shape or form, sadly, I think.
I think it's fear.
I think it's values. So I think, if you haven't studied your values, so we share as a couple, we share 5 values: love, intuition, freedom, enrichment, and nobility. Okay. So what our value isn't is money. Now, have we made money? Yes. Are we better off than most people? Sure. But so it's easy to say that when you've got some money. I appreciate that and I get all of that. But the fact of the matter is, even at the toughest times in business, and there's another podcast out there in America where I think it's me being interviewed, it might be Landy, where we talk about the time where we knocked back a $1.3 million deal. Now, nobody knocks back a $1.3 million deal when you're an SME, but we did. Why? Because it wasn't a values match. Who was it? A very large South African company.
And when you say, sorry to interject, when you say knock back, for clarity, you turned it down.
We turned it down. They offered us the contract, and we thought about it, and we said, no, we don't think we're the right fit. And I actually had the CEO calling me a lot of 4-letter words over the phone as I spoke to him afterwards. And then I realized, doesn't really love us. My intuition was right. And now we've got our freedom, that's for sure, because we're not going to be bogged down with them. They certainly weren't going to enrich our lives, and they're definitely not noble.
That's important.
Could I have used the money? Yes. But my life's more important.
A quick question. In terms of, let's look at, well, some people will say, okay, let's look at the reality. I'm putting myself in my client's shoes, because I do a lot of stress management, burnout, resilience type of workshops. So that is a reality at the moment. And how does conscious leadership come into that? Because that is something that I really see that people are struggling with. But something that you've mentioned is having boundaries, which is something, that I think is needed, because most people get up in the morning, check their phones first thing, emails, they're very responsive. But the reality is that people are burnt out. The pressure is quite high, in any industry, not only specific industries.
Yep. So it's a great question. Firstly, I saw a fantastic statistic. On average, people pick up their phones every 6 minutes. That's on 150 million users. So take that one for what it's worth. But and so we wonder why we're not getting stuff done. Conscious leadership is the answer to not feeling stressed and overwhelmed. Okay. So, because if you're conscious as a leader, you will go, I need to take a break. I need to take my holidays. I want to get home at 5 o'clock to have dinner with my spouse and tuck my kids into bed, because that's equally as important as finishing this report. It's about that type of consciousness. What it won't do is fix somebody who's already in that mix, unless they start to embrace conscious leadership and decide and make a decision in their own personal values that my life is more important than my job. And that's the decision that everybody that you're talking about is making. They're deciding that their job is more important than their life. Their job is more important than their family. Their job is more important than their relationships. And the job is more important than their health. That's a slippery slide. And I think there's no in between here. So you and I, dear listener, as a human being, has a decision. What's more important? Our spouse, our family, our health, and our life, and our relationships, or our job? It's your choice. Do we all need a job? Yes. How many jobs are there on the planet, right? Go and get another one. Oh, it doesn't work for you? Leave South Africa and work in London or Singapore. That doesn't work for you? Stay in South Africa and move to Cape Town. That doesn't work for you? Start your own business. There's a million different alternatives. We're not stuck. We have a mindset that we feel stuck. So I think conscious leadership is the answer to, once you're more collaborative, it takes pressure off you, and you have more mentors and advisors and things around like that. Once you're more purposeful, then you're more inspired to work, and it doesn't feel such a burden anymore. I often say to people, how do you know when you've got something that's really good and you really love doing it? you're prepared to start getting up at 4 a.m. to do it a couple of days a week, and it doesn't really bother you. When it's a drag, getting up at 7 a.m. bothers you.
That's very true. Yeah, it comes down all to choice, and people don't realize. They say my family and my health is very important, but their actions doesn't show that.
I find that a lot, and I would say there's a little bit of a cultural thing in South Africa about that. That's not necessarily in New Zealand, for instance. New Zealanders will go, yeah, my work's important, but I want to go home and, play with my kids. In South Africa, it's sort of like it's a macho thing in many respects. And it's definitely noticeable for me here that you'll say one thing but then you'll go and keep doing that. And I wouldn't say it's unique here. America's the same to a large extent as well. Try doing that in Italy. That ain't gonna work. Italians are gonna, go home at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, right? Because family is important, and it's cultural to an extent. So I'm not saying it's a bad cultural thing. I'm saying you have to have the awareness, and if you have the awareness, then you can make a decision what's right for you, whether to change to jump the fence or stay on the side of the fence you've always been.
Sure.
So interesting you say that. I've often said that Johannesburg, even with reference to the Cape, my brother lives in the Cape and I'm there fairly often. Johannesburg, I feel, almost has this materialistic cloud hanging over it. That when you're in Joburg, the clothes that you wear and the watch that you have and whether you have the latest phone and the car you drive, those things are all regarded by many, not all, but by many as being super important. Where move 1,500 Ks down south and go to the Cape, nobody really seems to give a damn. You can go to work in your jeans and your slops, and as long as, obviously there's things that need to be done in a workplace, but as long as things are being done, nobody's going to question the fact that you're off to enjoy a bit of late afternoon surfing at 3 o'clock. Where here, there's definitely almost, I use the phrase spirit, and perhaps it comes back to your definition earlier, Mike. There is a spirit of materialism and of greed and of almost gluttony in Joburg. And it could be a culture thing. Perhaps it's just my perception. I don't think it's only me, because people I've spoken to have echoed feeling the same. There's definitely something there. And perhaps one of the secrets in this life that we're living is to actually be in an environment and a community where we resonate with what's around us. And very often we put ourselves in places where we don't resonate and we wonder why we don't feel good.
You're absolutely right. And we always say that if you want to hire anybody who's going to work their butt off for you, get somebody who comes from Joburg, Sydney, or New York. They're all the same, the three of them. So it's all hardcore. It's go, go, go. It's money, money, money. It's those three, If you look at London, London's very different. London's like, let's go for a pint after work and all of that sort of, it's got that vibe to it. Paris, different again. Even some of the other big cities, LA is very different. But Joburg, Sydney, and New York are basically the same thing. Years ago when I was in corporate, if I got a CV across my desk from somebody who came from Johannesburg, they probably went to the top of my hire list, because I knew that they were going to dig in. I knew that they weren't going to muck around. I knew that they weren't going to take, days off and holidays and things like that. That's how it was back then.
And probably still the same now. I don't think much has changed.
Possibly not.
Mike, can I ask a question about your corporate experience?
Sure.
Is there a sense of hierarchy where there's a line of authority that needs to be followed that creates this lack of communication because of unapproachability?
Definitely. But I think it's because part of it's cultural within an organization. So it doesn't exist in all organizations. That would be wrong for me to say it. And I think it is changing. So there is that. Secondly, I think it's historical. So, it comes from the Henry Fords, if you like, and, you can have any car as long as it's black and get back in the production line. You've got to remember that the education system that you and I were educated under, which is, we call it a British system, but it's actually American, was designed by 4 billionaires in the 1850s to keep us literally working in the factories and not become entrepreneurial of spirit. But the other thing, I think the reason why that happens is that there's a lot of people in corporate that have seemed to have got themselves in jobs that they probably don't deserve. And because of that, they like to throw their weight around because they certainly aren't able to do it at home. So they're probably not going to be like that at home. It's like, I don't know if you've ever been told off by a parking ticket inspector or something like that when you've parked your car for 10 minutes too long. You sort of go, where's all this attitude coming from, dude? You've just got a job, but it's because they can throw their weight around in a role. So it gives a lot of people that ability to do that. And, comes from the whole treat 'em mean, keep 'em keen sort of philosophy that came out of the 60s. So I think we're still resonant of that. It is changing. There's a lot of companies doing a lot of work to be more equitable, but I mean, gender-based violence and bullying and everything like that in corporates is as rife as ever, and it's really visible to the greater society in the last few years. So I think it's that too will pass. It swings and roundabouts. Everything is some type of cycle.
Thank you so much, Mike. Any last words that you want to maybe leave with our listeners before we wrap it up today?
Well, we've talked a lot, Marika, about materialism in some respects today. And I would just say to people that, when you leave this planet, you're not going to be taking your Mercedes-Benz and your Rolex with you, okay? What you're going to be taking with you is the memories of the people you loved and the good times you had and the contributions that you made on this planet. So I'm all about making better memories. And I think that's what life's about. And I think the more we as human beings can focus on creating better memories for ourselves and the other people around us, the better off we'll leave our footprint when it's time for us to graduate.
And on that note, I don't think there's anything more that we could say to capture the essence of who Mike is and what today's talk has been about. So from us, thank you for joining us for another edition of the Coaching Hour podcast. Cheers for now.